Last week, Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. gave a press conference all about investigating the link between environmental toxins and autism. And the premise was that autism can't possibly be due to what most scientists say it's due to, which is differences in our diagnostic system and our ability to detect and recognize symptoms of autism. So last week, we posted a video on this channel responding to that press conference, trying to highlight all the misleading and inaccurate and harmful information conveyed there. But shortly after that press conference, there was a follow-up where it was then announced that they're creating an autism registry so they can better study everybody with autism. They've since walked back that claim and just said that they're really just kind of linking up a bunch of databases to be better able to study autism. But it really freaked a lot of people out, and you can't unring that bell. Now that that's what they said, there's a lot of distrust out there. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Eric Newman. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I specialize in psychological testing and assessment, and in particular, the assessment and diagnosis of autism. So in this video, I want to talk about the fallout that I'm already seeing from this announcement of an autism registry following that press conference. So the first thing I want to talk about is that there's a huge lack of transparency and trust around what they're saying and what they're doing. So they're saying they're going to create a way to link all these databases that are out there. So we don't know exactly how they're planning to go about linking all these databases that they're talking about, but I think they're talking about linking hospital databases and pharmacy records and lab testing and genomics, and they're even talking about those wearable devices that track, various body metrics, and then also the insurance system tracking insurance claims. Now, I don't think anyone's really been very clear about this. To be clear, that would be highly problematic. As someone who files claims with insurance companies for psychological testing, I can tell you that is not going to be an accurate way of figuring this out, and here's why. In order for me to even bill insurance for a psychological evaluation, I have to put a diagnosis on a claim form. What does that mean? It means that when someone comes in for an evaluation, they don't know what the diagnosis is. I don't know what the diagnosis is. I'm there to figure that out, right? But sometimes there is no diagnosis. Sometimes we do an evaluation and we don't detect the thing that they suspect that might be there. But I can't file a claim for that evaluation unless I put a diagnosis on there. And that's a well-known fact in the insurance industry for these things, for these evaluations, is that you have to put a diagnosis on there whether there's an actual diagnosis or not. So if they're tracking people based and deciding they have ASD based on claim forms, that's going to be highly problematic, because there's going to be a lot of people there who have those diagnoses on there because it had to be put on there in order to get paid, and not because it's actually accurate. But anyway, I digress. This whole idea of creating an autism registry is causing a lot of fear in the community. People are worried about their privacy violations, and to be honest, people are even more worried about things like essentially eugenics, the idea that they're going to be put on this registry so everyone knows who they are, and then they're going to sterilize them so they can't reproduce and have more kids with autism. Does that sound far-fetched? Maybe, but let's look at all the other stuff going on in this country right now. We're actually sending 2-year-old American citizens, deporting them to other countries. So who knows? In any case, I've actually seen this firsthand in my business, because I do evaluations. I do a lot of evaluations. I do exclusively evaluations. And I've had a handful of people call me just within the last week, either to express concern and ask my thoughts about proceeding with the evaluation based on what's going on right now, or just flat out canceling because they're just not comfortable doing it. And this puts parents in a position with their kids of trying to figure out, do I put my kid at this risk so I can get them the help that they need? Or do I forego the help that they need and potentially put them in a worse off position going into the rest of their lives in order to protect them from potentially being put on some registry where they're going to know who they are for the rest of their lives, and who knows if they'll ever come after them. But also, this isn't just a problem for people who are concerned about getting a diagnosis of autism. It's also a big problem for people who are perfectly willing to get a diagnosis and who want to pursue an evaluation. And I'll tell you how. But first, if you're getting value from this video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button, hit the like, hit the notification bell, hit all those things to help us get these videos out to more people, and so you get notified for future videos. Okay, so how does this affect people who want a diagnosis if all these other people are concerned? You might think, well, if people are canceling their appointments, maybe there's openings for people who actually want them. That might be true, but also what's true is a lot of people who do these evaluations also do therapy. And think about it from the perspective of someone in my position who does these evaluations. If I have other things I can fill my time with that are more stable, that I'm not afraid people are going to cancel and then I'm going to be out a bunch of money, if I can fill my schedule with therapy clients, I personally don't do that, but a lot of people do. If I could personally fill my schedule with therapy clients, I probably would. And a lot of people are going to do that. They're going to decide evaluations are not a predictable source of income right now, so I'm going to fill my schedule up with the things that are predictable. And then what happens? Those are weekly clients. They fill up people's schedules on a weekly basis, and now those hours are gone. They're not available for testing. They're being used for therapy. So, yeah, now all of a sudden, the people who were doing these evaluations are no longer offering them, or offering them at a much smaller scale because it's not predictable enough for them to be able to do it. Okay, so what services then will this announcement of an autism registry, even if it's not really what's happening, when people get nervous about an idea like that and they want to hold back on services, what is this affecting? What kinds of services can you get, can't you get? So, the big one, as far as I'm concerned, because this is what I do, and it also is where the chain starts in terms of getting a diagnosis, is the evaluation piece. But beyond that, there are certain services that you may not be able to get without a diagnosis. So like the big one would be ABA therapy, or applied behavior analysis, and I've done a video on that. You can check that out up here. But for ABA therapy, you actually need an autism diagnosis in most states in order for it to be reimbursed by insurance. So, if you don't have that diagnosis, unless you're rich and want to pay out of pocket, which some of you may be, but unless that's you, then that's not going to go well for you. And then the other thing is, going to school and getting services and accommodations at school, you need an individualized education program, or an IEP, or a 504 accommodation plan at least, in order to get some of those supports in the school setting. And a lot of times, even though theoretically they can do their own IEP evaluations in school and see if you meet criteria for their definition of autism, because that's one of the classifications that you can get an IEP under, in practice, a lot of the time that doesn't happen unless you come in with an external diagnosis, a medical diagnosis of autism. So if you can't get that done, then sometimes you can't get those services either in school. Okay, so then what services are still available, or what can parents do if you're concerned about going and getting a diagnosis because of the risk it might place? What can you do instead? What services are still available to you? So a couple of things: speech language pathology, or speech language therapy. That is something that a lot of kids with autism need and benefit from, and it doesn't necessarily require a diagnosis of autism. It can just be done as a speech and language impairment. The same thing goes for occupational therapy. A lot of kids go to occupational therapy for fine motor skills, or gross motor skills, or emotion regulation, or sensory processing issues, but they can do that without a diagnosis. So those are things, speech language therapy and occupational therapy are hugely important for early intervention, and those are things you can do without a diagnosis. So if you're worried, maybe start there. Other things, you could do, you could pursue counseling, just general counseling. And there are some things that can be done in terms of working on social skills and social perspective taking and emotion regulation, the things that often are challenges in autism. It may not be as good at directly addressing the symptoms of autism, but that's certainly far better than nothing. And a lot of people don't even need ABA, or a lot of people are higher functioning autism are perfectly fine in therapy. So that's certainly a possibility. As far as an evaluation, that's tough, because obviously the main goal of that, especially if you're going through insurance, is to get a diagnosis. But there are alternatives. You may have heard of a psychoeducational evaluation as opposed to a psychological evaluation. These terms are used to mean a lot of different things in different contexts, but one way to think about the difference is that a psychological evaluation results in diagnoses. A psychoeducational evaluation, though, in some ways of using that term, could mean it's an evaluation to describe a level of functioning and to help understand conceptually what's going on, so that you can start to do things about it, even if it's not in clinically, but just come up with some ideas, some things that you can do at home. Then you need that information to better understand. You could potentially do an evaluation that doesn't involve diagnosing. Of course, then you can't go through insurance, so you're paying out of pocket for that. So, and that's the other thing you can do, if you don't want the diagnosis on your record right now, but you want it there for the future, is you can get an evaluation. Don't go through insurance, so that the insurance claim is not filed with a diagnosis on it. Unfortunately, you do have to pay out of pocket, and so if you have the money for that, that's great. If you don't, obviously that's a problem. But if you do that, at least you can have that there for your own personal record, but not share it with anyone until you feel ready. Okay, so just to wrap this up, we've seen that this announcement of this Autism Registry has been hugely problematic for people. It's caused a lot of fear, a lot of concern. It's causing people to not pursue services they need. And unfortunately, you can't just change people's trust, make them trust government systems again, or trust the medical system again, just because you've walked back your rhetoric and said, oh, no, we're not creating an autism registry, after everyone kind of blew up about it, because no one's going to trust you, right? That ship has kind of sailed. A lot of people have asked me what I think about this and whether I trust, the system and the government and, what everybody's doing here to make this research happen. And honestly, I tell them, no, I don't. If I'm asked what I think in terms of weighing the pros and cons, I still kind of think that it's better to get those services in as early as possible, and do that despite the risk of maybe potentially someday that data being used against you. But I can't say that for certain. That's just kind of how I feel about it. Ultimately, unfortunately, I think renewed trust is going to come with new and different leadership. I don't know how quickly that's going to happen. I hope it happens sooner than later. And, at that point, we can start moving back in the right direction, and maybe we can prevent any of the worst potential, risks that we think about us being associated with this from ever coming to fruition. But I don't know, maybe that's wishful thinking. In the meantime, we've talked about some things here that you can do if you are concerned, that you can do without getting a diagnosis for now, until you feel more comfortable. And if you haven't checked out that video on RFK and his press conference, you can check that out here, where we respond to, his everything he says there. And if you're interested in just a more general take on the pros and cons of pursuing a mental health diagnosis of any kind, you can check that out here. Really appreciate you watching, and we will see you in the next video.